Welcome again to Feminist Fridays workshop. Today we're talking about SOGIE and intersectionality. We aim to show how awareness and activism against other kinds of oppression make various movements stronger. Feminist Fridays is brought to you by Filipino Freethinkers and the Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights, WGNRR, done in partnership with the Sanctuary Project and supported by the Global Fund for Women. Here are a few reminders for everyone. This workshop will be recorded and streamed live on Facebook. You may rename yourself if you'd like. Please keep your video turned off and your audio muted during the workshop. But we encourage you to use the chat to react or ask questions. Please post online about this workshop or about what you learned and use the hashtag Feminist Fridays. There will be a question and answer portion at the end.
Hello, hi everyone. We're here for another Feminist Fridays workshop. Today we're talking about SOGIE and intersectionality. So we aim to show how awareness and activism against other kinds of oppression make various movements stronger. And we also want to talk about intersectionality and how minorities and those marginalized can work together.
Feminist Fridays is brought to you again by the Filipino Freethinkers and the Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights, done in partnership with the Sanctuary Project and is supported by the Global Fund for Women. So here for WGNRR is Shif Belongel. Shif, are you here?
All right. I'll just give a very brief introduction to WGNRR and the work that we do and why we're supporting this activity. So the Women's Global Network for Reproductive Rights is a global network that connects and strengthens movements for sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice. Through critical analysis and strategic actions, we connect members, partners, and allies, build knowledge, organize campaigns, and share our resources. Our key objectives are to coordinate and strengthen national and regional networks of sexual and reproductive health and rights, or SRHR, organizations, initiating activities that ensure that all women and girls are able to exercise their right to make free and informed decisions regarding their SRHR. Recognizing the central role of the global women's movement in SRHR, their scholarship and activism, WGNRR wants to do its part as well in enlarging feminist spaces in our country. We believe in the potential of these spaces to elevate discourse and to demand genuine fulfillment of rights of women and girls in all their diversity. With the Filipino Freethinkers, we aim for Feminist Fridays to be the space to do just that. But we also want to make sure that our discussions here do not just remain lofty and intellectual, but that we are able to carve out a path for everyone to be able to participate in advocacy spaces and work in partnership with women of varying and intersecting vulnerabilities and contexts. Through our work with our various partners and networks, we have seen and validated how the lived experiences of women in accessing sexual and reproductive health services and information can be very diverse, influenced by age, socioeconomic status, location, physical health, among many other factors. Moreover, countries in the global south operate according to varying legal frameworks, socio-political and economic conditions, and religious and cultural contexts, producing their own sets of barriers and facilitators to access. Hence, intersectionality, the understanding that multiple oppressions and contexts contribute to very specific and unique experiences for each person, has become very important in our work. I'm sure this is true for any other advocacy space, especially those that identify as feminist spaces. So on behalf of WGNRR, I would like to thank Filipino Freethinkers for organizing this activity on this very important subject. And thanks also to everyone for coming, and I hope we all have a productive session today.
Thank you, Shif. And for a message from Filipino Freethinkers Co-President Red Tani. Red, are you here? There.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So when we started Filipino Freethinkers in 2009, we never intended to be an advocacy or activist group for human rights, for feminism. Originally, we just wanted to promote the values of reason, science, and secularism. But maybe a month or two, we realized that you can't claim to promote reason, science, and secularism without thinking about issues like feminism. And we got into advocacy of the reproductive health bill. Now it's, of course, a law. And when we were doing advocacy on the reproductive health bill, you can't avoid other feminist issues. And we got into feminist issues as well because of the intersections there. And you can't do feminist issues or think about them without thinking about LGBT issues, without thinking about SOGIE issues. And you can't do all of those things without thinking of freedom of speech. And there are so many things in common in these issues. And I guess what we've learned in more than 10 years is that all of the arguments, the rational ones, all of the scientific evidence, they all point to supporting people who are typically marginalized or to all kinds of minorities in our country. And a victory in one issue contributes to the whole movement. So we encourage you to keep learning about all of these things through participating in events like this and other such events that talk about feminism, because it's very important for us to see how everything connects, how everything is interconnected, and most importantly, to help us and other secular groups as well to fight for separation of church and state. No one religion should dictate to all the rest of the citizens in our secular country how we should live our lives. And most importantly, we should stop hurting people who are marginalized by all of our conservative laws and prejudices. And we should ask that true equality and justice be achieved for all. Thanks.
Thank you, Red. And just a few reminders for everyone. This workshop will be recorded and streamed live on Facebook. You may rename yourself if you'd like. Please keep your video turned off and your audio muted during the workshop. But we encourage you to use the chat to react or ask questions. Please post online about this workshop or about what you learned and use the hashtag Feminist Fridays. There will be a question and answer portion at the end. So Bea here is going to talk about SOGIE and intersectionality. And just to introduce her to everyone, she is an assistant professor at the UP Diliman Department of Psychology, where she teaches LGBT psychology among other courses. She currently serves as the chairperson of the Psychological Association of the Philippines LGBT Psychology Special Interest Group. Bea completed her BS and MA in psychology in UP Diliman and was a participant in the International LGBT Psychology Summer Institute in 2010 at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Her master's thesis on experiences of everyday sexism among Filipino women of diverse sexual orientations was recognized by the British Psychological Society, Psychology of Sexualities, with a postgraduate award, and by the Psychological Association of the Philippines with an Outstanding Graduate Thesis Award. Welcome, Bea.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Pin. Welcome to this afternoon's workshop on SOGIE and intersectionality. So I'm very excited about the topics that we will talk about today, as well as the insights that our guests will be sharing later on in our panel discussion. So we're going to start with a brief session on SOGIE, just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what these terms mean, or what meanings these terms can have, as well as a brief introduction to the concept of intersectionality and why these are important in feminism.
There. Thank you, everyone. So, wow, daming atheist. Okay, Bea, can we talk about what everyone entered?
Okay, so far, we're seeing a lot of different descriptions of the people in this group, in this audience. And we can already see some indicators that this is kind of a different group from, this is not exactly the same as the general Filipino population. So for example, we can see that quite a lot of people in this group identify as agnostic and atheist in terms of their religion. So it seems like there are a lot of heterosexual or cisgender heterosexual women. But we also see that there are people in the group who identify as bisexual, who identify as queer and non-binary. Some people describe themselves as pansexual or queer. And the interesting thing here is that because we entered our SOGI descriptions and our religion descriptions separately, for the most part, we can't really tell what combinations of these identities people have in this group. So for example, for me, I entered cis het woman and atheist. But for some people, we don't know what combinations of those descriptions they identify as. And one thing we can think about is how does the specific combination of identities that you have shape your experiences, whether that's your experiences of privilege or your experiences of marginalization. And I think maybe in the next word cloud, we can also we can examine that a little further.
Yes. There. So can you explain, Bea, what they can enter?
Okay. So for this next question, we're asking you to enter your social class, ability, status, and region. So for social class, simply indicate you could put lower class, middle class, or upper class. Let's just keep that very simple. So yung tatlong options lang na yun, just for this activity. And then for ability status, you could put PWD depending on if you have a disability. If not, just put abled. And for region, we're referring to which part of the Philippines you are currently based in. So maybe that's NCR, Greater Luzon, Visayas, or Mindanao. Okay, so we're starting to see people's answers to this one. So, so far, I think people are still continuing to input their answers. But so far, one thing we can see is that it's maybe not as diverse as the previous set of identities. So it seems like in the group that we have right now, the majority of people are middle class and abled and are based in NCR, so in Metro Manila. Of course, we have people who put in different answers. And again, we can start to think about what do the different combinations of our answers possibly mean for our experiences of marginalization, privilege, or just our day-to-day experiences. So, for example, if someone is middle class and based in the NCR, in Metro Manila, but is a PWD, how might their experiences be different from those who are middle class and also based in the NCR but are able? And we can also imagine that those experiences would be further differentiated if we were to start thinking about our answers from the previous question. So yung SOGI and religion. Okay, so it looks like we have some people who are not based in Metro Manila. Yay! So we have people here in the group who are in Mindanao, who are in region 7.
4A, yeah.
Okay, so it's great to know that we have people from the different regions, because it's also, I think, important, especially in the Philippines, to discuss how yung regional identities natin might also shape our experiences of marginalization and privilege. in a lot of the literature on intersectionality, we often see them talking about race. And of course, that's very important. But here in the Philippines, because we don't have quite as diverse a group of races or racial or ethnic backgrounds, if you're living in the Philippines, for some of us, yung conversations around race are not quite easy to grasp. But maybe mas relevant sa atin yung in our personal lives, yung pag-consider ng how does the region where I'm from shape my experiences of privilege, of marginalization, and many other things. Okay. So as we said, we will be talking about SOGIE and intersectionality. So most of you are probably already familiar with these terms and these frameworks. So I'm not sure if it's accurate to call it a 101, but I hope that we can explore maybe some of the nuances of these frameworks, especially for those of us who wish to continue developing our feminist advocacies. Okay. Again, next slide, please. Yan. Okay, so we're gonna start with a very light activity. So we're gonna objectify / look at some hotties. So I hope all of you are familiar with the game FMK, Fuck, Marry, Kill. Is it okay if I say that? So all we need you to do is take a look at the hotties that are currently on your screen and tell us, so for this activity, let's all be temporarily pansexual. So just based on the images that you're seeing on the screen, among these three, who would you choose to fuck, to marry, or to kill? So you can input your answers in the chat. Okay, so thank you, Sue, for starting us off. So, so sabi ni Sue, kill A. Okay. And then fuck and marry B. Wow. Okay.
Nawala si
So,
C.
Inignore niya si C. Si Mang Tomas said, fuck B, marry A, and kill C. Okay, so Martha de Guzman, si A yung kanyang F.
Mukhang maraming gustong i-kill si C.
Oo nga. I wonder if it's the presentation, the parang, is it the tattoos? Is it
Or
the
posture.
muscular? Maybe it's the body language na parang it's a little bit more parang aggressive than most of the others. Okay, so I'm seeing some answers that are a little different. So Katrina said, yung F niya is si C. Oh. And then yung ima-marry niya is si A and yung ikikill niya is si B. So yun yung medyo na iba. Okay. Okay. So Lay said na si A yung ima-marry niya, si B yung ikikill niya, at si C yung ifa-fuck niya. Okay. So, sabi ni Katrina, maybe it's the tattoos and the hair. Okay. But for her, that's what she likes. Okay, everyone. Thank you for participating in this quick round of FMK. We actually have a second round. So like I said, we're all pansexual for the moment, temporarily. So in this group of 3 individuals, our 3 hotties, who would you F, who would you M, and who would you K? So someone, by the way, was asking who's the B guy. We will reveal later who the hotties are. So for those of you who are not familiar with them. But for now, let's go through this second round.
Mamaya nyo na sila i-stalk.
So Martha, for Martha, it's fuck all of them. Wow. Okay, why not? Axel Simeon said, si C yung i-F niya, si A yung ima-marry niya, si B yung i-kill niya. Okay. So
Marry
Pride,
all daw. Sabi ni Laura.
marry all. Si Laura. Okay. Okay, interesting. So, yung iba na-identify nila yung ating hotties, or at least some of our hotties. So, si Price, sabi niya, he will fuck and marry letter C, who is Janelle Monáe. Of course, she's a queen. And ikikill daw niya si A. Okay. So Sue says this is more difficult. Oh, sorry, Price. Okay, so Sue says mas mahirap yung round na to. So si C daw yung i-F niya, si B daw yung i-marry niya, at si A yung i-kill niya. Okay, so are you ready for us to reveal the identities of our hotties for rounds 1 and 2? So I think we can go on to the next slide, but feel free to continue considering this very important question of who you will F, M, or K. Pero sige, let's take a look at who these hotties are in the next slide.
Isisingit ko lang din, you can actually edit your name so that you can add your pronouns. And thank you for letting us know, Price.
Okay. All right. So yes, if anyone would like to include their pronouns in their name dito sa Zoom meeting, feel free to do so. Okay. So our first round of hotties included, si letter A was Jonathan Groff. So some of you may be familiar with him from TV or from Broadway. He is an American actor. And he identifies as a gay cisgender man. Yung si B was Rain, a Korean singer who identifies as a straight cisgender man. And mukhang there is an enthusiastic response to him based on our chat. And our third is Adrian Dowling, an American entrepreneur who is straight, meaning heterosexual, and a trans man. So I think hindi naman naka-affect yung identities niya na yon dun sa choice ng mga tao kanina na siya yung ikikill nila. But yeah, so these are our first round of hotties. Sige, second round. All right. So first, si letter A is Lily Reinhardt. She's an American actress. If there are any people here who watch the series Riverdale, I think she's on that series. And she relatively recently came out as bisexual, and she is a cisgender woman. Si Harry Sue is a Korean singer. She is a trans woman. You might notice that I didn't indicate her sexual orientation, whether she is heterosexual or bi or a lesbian woman, because I don't know. I don't personally know. I'm not very aware of her relationships or her attractions, so hindi ko na lang in-indicate. And then finally, si letter C, si Janelle Monáe, a US-based singer-songwriter actress who also relatively recently came out as pansexual. Oh, so Katrina is asking if she is non-binary. I'm not actually sure. There have been some developments in her public identification. So if I've missed something, I'm sorry about that. So maybe let's see if meron bang more recent siya na, if she came out as non-binary more recently. But thank you to Katrina for sharing that, because it actually illustrates something very important about our identities in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, which is that these identities can be very fluid. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with how you previously identified. It might be that at a certain moment in your life, you identified in a certain way, but that can change as you go through different experiences. So yung game that we did, these 2 rounds of FMK, so thank you everyone for participating, also show us that the spectrum of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression can indeed be very, very diverse. And also that these characteristics are related, but they are not the same. So yung sexual orientation natin is not the same as our gender identity and gender expression, which also are not determined by our assigned sex. Right? So next slide, please. So just a quick run through. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with these terms. In our alphabet, LGBT, we'll start with the last letter. The T stands for transgender, which refers to men and women whose assigned sex at birth differs from their gender identity. So their assigned sex at birth is what the doctor said basically when they were born, when they came out of the womb. So maybe the doctor said, it's a girl. But later on, as this person grew up and developed further and got to know themselves better, they did not identify as a girl. So if they identified as a boy or a man, yun yung gender identity nila. Okay, so for transgender people, sige, next slide, please. Oh, by the way, sorry, the persons in this slide, so dun sa previous slide, we had si Miss Angela Ponce, yung Miss Spain, I think 2 years ago, she competed in the Miss Universe pageant. And that was kind of controversial for some people who felt that they were not comfortable with having a trans woman compete in a beauty pageant for women. So that raised the question of who is included in women. So the guy in the slide is Balian Bushbaum. He is a trans man. He is a former Olympic athlete. So he competed in pole vaulting. And he is an advocate for transgender rights. Okay, next slide, please. So for trans men and trans women, there's a process of migrating from one side of the gender binary to the other. So because our society categorizes gender usually in terms of a binary, so either male or female, for some people, when they are assigned into one gender or one category, they don't quite feel right with that category and they would prefer to migrate or move towards the other side, which resonates more strongly with them. So one example also locally is si Jake Zyros. So his assigned sex, when he was born, the doctor said, it's a girl. But later on, he came out and said, I identify as a man, lalaki ako. And he expresses himself in a masculine way. So Jake is an example of a trans man. Sige, next slide, please. And something I wanted to briefly touch on is that for transgender people, there is usually a process of transitioning which can include any of these three. Pwedeng social transitioning, meaning living in the gender that you identify as. So maybe changing the way you present yourself in terms of your clothes, your hair, your voice. Some undergo biomedical transitioning through hormone therapy and or gender affirming surgeries. And some, depending on what country they are in, might seek to transition legally. So having the gender markers on their legal documents changed. So in these photos, you can see a part of the transitioning process of my good friend, Hender. So si Hender underwent, you can see in these photos how she underwent social transitioning so that her gender expression as a woman, her feminine gender expression, more closely matched her gender identity. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. So in the Philippines, we are often, and in many parts of the world really, I think there's often some confusion about gender identity because we often tend to think that it is the same thing as sexual orientation. Or that it defines our sexual orientation. So many people assume that if you are a trans woman, then you must be attracted to men. And if you are a trans man, you must be attracted to women. But actually, the experiences of transgender people show that their identity as trans does not define their sexual orientation. So for one example, we have Angie King, who was already married to a woman, to a cisgender woman, si Joey Mead King, before siya nag-transition as, or come out as a trans woman. So when Angie King came out as a trans woman, some people were confused. They thought, maybe they're going to split up kasi babae na siya. But what they said was, they're still very much in love with each other. They want to remain a couple. And yung pagiging trans ni Angie does not mean na nagbago yung attraction niya towards women. So it's possible for a trans woman to be lesbian or bisexual. It's possible for a trans man to be gay or bisexual also. So in other words, those two categories do not define each other. Okay, next slide, please. So the other letters in our LGBT alphabet include L, which stands for lesbian or lesbian girls or women who like, fall in love with, and have intimate partnerships with other girls and women. Okay, next slide. The G in LGBT stands for boys or men who like, fall in love with, and have intimate partnerships with other boys and men. So we can use the terms gay men to refer to them, or gay boys if they are minors. And finally, the B in LGBT stands for bisexual, which refers to women and men or girls and boys who are attracted to and form romantic relationships with either women or men. Okay. So I know that there are a lot of other letters that have been added to the LGBT alphabet. And later, if there are questions about those, we can also talk about that. But for now, parang let's just at least we've defined or described those 4 letters in the LGBT alphabet. Okay. So just so you know, in case you're feeling like, na-leave out ako, hindi naman ako LGBT, bakit ganon? So we also have terms. So for example, we use the term heterosexual, or more casually, the term straight, for boys who prefer girls and girls who prefer boys or are attracted to boys. So just like being LGBT is normal, being heterosexual is also normal, psychologically speaking. And if you are not transgender, meaning your assigned sex at birth and your gender identity are the same, we use the term cisgender. So meaning if you are assigned male at birth and identify as male, you can be described as a cisgender man. If you were assigned female at birth and identify as a woman, you can be described as a cisgender woman. So again, this is normal and it's not a slur, please. So when someone refers to you as cis, CIS, it's not mech is reacting to the photos. Bakit? Cisgender naman sila. And yung pagiging cisgender is psychologically speaking normal. Okay. So just to be clear, yung terms na L and G and D and T are descriptions of how we fit into yung available na categories around SOGIE. So yung GIE in SOGIE refers to our gender identity, GI, as well as our gender expression, how we present ourselves. So yung T in LGBT, being trans and being cisgender, describes our experiences of gender and especially our gender identity. So how do you identify? Okay, so next slide. On the other hand, the LGB in LGBT, and also yung being straight, being heterosexual, describes our attractions, our crushes, our romantic relationships, our partnerships. So yun yung SO in SOGIE, or sexual orientation. Okay, so I hope we're a bit clear about those two categories or those two aspects of our identities. So one thing to keep in mind is that although being trans and being gay or lesbian are often confused in everyday life, there is an important distinction between them, because those are descriptions of different aspects of our sexual orientation. And oops. Sige, next slide, please. So another important take-home point is that gender identity and sexual orientation are part of all of our identities. You don't have to be LGBT to have a gender identity. And you don't have to be you don't have to be LGBT to have a sexual orientation. So everyone has a sexual orientation, or can be described in terms of their sexual orientation and their gender identity. And those two things, the combinations of how we identify in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity, can influence our experiences. But I want to remind everyone that those are definitely not the only important aspects of our identities. So that's where the intersectionality in today's conversation comes in. Yeah. So yung term na intersectionality is something that has been coming up a lot recently in feminist advocacy, in LGBTQ movements. So ano ba yung ibig sabihin niya? So intersectionality can mean many different things. One definition that I like is that intersectionality refers to analytic approaches that consider the meanings and consequences of multiple categories of social group membership. So if we think about the ways that we answered yung Slido question earlier, diba? We were asked about our sexual orientation, our religion, our social class, our ability status, ano pa ba, the regions that we came from. From an intersectional perspective, the combinations of all of those social identities that we have or social groups that we are part of carries with them specific meanings. So yung pagiging heterosexual, cisgender, abled woman living in Metro Manila, merong differences at meron ding similarities from the experiences of being someone who is a PWD trans woman living in Mindanao. And those multiple categories and multiple identities also carry with them consequences for our experiences of privilege on one hand and oppression on the other. Okay, next slide, please. So another way we can define it is, it's an analytic lens through which we can consider how multiple forms of marginality and privilege shape the lived experiences of all individuals and social groups. Meaning all of us carry with us aspects of our social identities that may mean that in some ways we are marginalized, but we might also experience some forms of privilege depending on other aspects of our identity. So intersectionality is a perspective that can be confusing for some. So merong mga common misconceptions about what it means. So hopefully we can go through some examples of what do we mean when we say na multiple identities shape our experiences of marginality and privilege. So I want to give one example. When we talk about harassment, for example, sexual harassment. So many women experience harassment. And one thing that I often hear from straight women is the story of, or yung pinopoint out nila na they get harassed by men, but when these men find out that they are married or have a boyfriend, parang their harassers will back off. And so, of course, that reveals certain forms of oppression and certain forms of marginality. But on the other hand, sexual minority women, like lesbian women or bisexual women, have different experiences. So yung kinikwento nila is that sometimes when they go out in public, they get harassed. But when they get harassed by men, and when those men find out that they have a partner who is also a woman, instead of backing off, mas lalo silang mahaharas. So nagkakaroon ng added dimension na they experience harassment not as a woman separately, not as a sexual minority separately, but as the combination of those two things. Okay? Parang na-hypersexualize sila, specifically because they are lesbian women. So parang that's an intersectional way of looking at the phenomenon of harassment. Okay. Yan. So sabi ni Laura sa chat, yes, this is one common thing that lesbian couples hear. Talaga, prove it. Parang, sige nga, pakita nyo sa amin. Mag-make out kayo in front of us. So it's a different form of harassment. And so intersectionality is an important perspective in feminism. So it's a way of considering how our experiences of gender-based discrimination and oppression can be compounded by many things, including, but not limited to, our race, our socioeconomic status, our sexual orientation, and many other things like our ability or disability status, for example. Okay, next slide, please. Sige. So one insight that I found very helpful as I learn about intersectionality Yung sabi ni Elizabeth Cole, so she is a feminist psychologist, sabi niya, one way that we can start to apply or practice an intersectional perspective is when we are talking about advocacy for the rights or well-being of a group, we can ask who are included in this category. And of course, yung implicit question din doon is who is not included. And what role does inequality play dun sa answer sa first question? Meron bang forms of inequality that determine who gets to be included and who does not? And finally, where are there similarities across the people who are included in that category and those who are not included? So meaning, when we talk about intersectionality, we definitely want to look at differences, but we also want to look at similarities. Kasi tinitingnan natin kung saan tayo merong shared forms of oppression na na-experience. Okay, next slide, please. So one example, in the Philippines, we do have a thriving women's rights movement, diba? So kaya merong Magna Carta for Women, meron tayong batas against VAUSI. But one thing we can ask is, or three things we can ask, rather, are who are included in the category women? Who is protected? Whose rights are upheld by the Magna Carta for Women? And who are not? So if a trans woman is discriminated against, will the Magna Carta for Women protect her? If not, second question, what role does inequality play? So meron bang forms of inequality that are determining who is considered a woman who can be protected by these laws and who is not? And finally, where are there similarities? So if there are people who are not included by the Magna Carta for Women and other legal instruments, meron bang similar sila na experiences compared dun sa mga tao na included sa category na ito, para masabi natin na, teka lang, mukhang kailangan nating i-reconsider yung definition natin ng category na to. So, like I said, if you look at the experiences of trans women, there are many similarities to the experiences of cisgender women. Trans women experience harassment, they experience violence, including sexual violence, actually at higher rates even than cisgender women do. So, yung experiences ng cisgender women ng oppression and marginalization, actually maraming similarities, maraming overlaps with those of transgender women. So maybe it's time to start thinking about how we can include trans women in our struggles and in our advocacies. Okay. Sige, next slide, please. So I wanted to clear up some common misconceptions or common criticisms na nire-raise against intersectionality. One is, people will say, Oppression Olympics yan. Parang naghahanap na lang kayo ng sino ba yung pinaka-marginalized, sino yung pinaka-worse off. And the notion, I think, here is that people assume na the more minority identities you are part of, ibig sabihin you are more oppressed or more marginalized or the biggest victim. But one of the really interesting things about intersectionality is that it's not an additive approach. So it's not a matter of saying, I am a woman plus I am straight plus I am ganito. But rather, qualitative siya. So we are talking about how when these different identities combine, nagbabago yung quality, yung nature ng experiences natin. So hindi siya plus, 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 plus. So it becomes difficult to talk about who is the most or least oppressed because yung combinations ng identities natin shape the nature of how we are oppressed. Okay. Also, madalas kasi when people start talking about intersectionality, it kind of devolves into a check your privilege argument. And I want to say right off the bat that this is not a criticism of the act of checking your privilege. I do think it's important. I think it's important to start looking into how our identities might give us some privilege over others. But we do not end intersectional oppression just by checking our privilege. Kumbaga, that's an important step, but it's just a step. Okay. What's important is to also look at the structures and the systems that create or co-create these forms of oppression. So we do not stop by talking about our personal experiences of having different identities. That's the start. But we have to go further with that and take a look at how can we address different forms of oppression. So sabi nga ni Audrey Lord, so Audrey Lord is a lesbian feminist, poet, also a woman of color. Sabi niya, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. So yung struggles natin, yung movements natin, yung advocacies natin, they can be informed by an intersectional perspective. And hopefully, as we go through the rest of this afternoon's activities, we can see how intersectionality can make our movements stronger. Okay, so I'm going to end here so that we have time to listen to our panel of speakers. So for those of you who are interested, I've compiled a short list of suggested materials, including I definitely recommend yung TED Talk ni Kimberly Crenshaw, yung last item sa list, because Crenshaw is one of the woman who is credited with developing the term intersectionality, and she is a legal scholar. So mas sa law niya ina-apply yung analysis ng intersectionality.
Yeah, so please choose a number and then write your name. Like you can double click the note and then you can write your name there so that you can claim it. And then later we're going to show you what these identities are so that we can role play. There, so who wants to be number 1? There. So please remember your numbers and maybe you can write down or remember your story. So Bea, can you explain 1 to 15?
Okay, so yung depending on the number that you chose, so ranging from 1 to 15, for this activity, you will take on a particular identity. So shall we go through all of them?
Sure.
Okay. So si number 1 is a straight cisgender man who is a doctor, 42 years old, and is married with 3 children. So si number 1, si Martha, yun muna yung identity mo for this game. Si number 2 is a straight male teacher with a physical disability. He's 27, single, and uses a wheelchair. Number 3 is a lesbian, cisgender woman who is a social worker. She's 49, Muslim, in a long-term relationship and has 3 children. Okay. Number 4, meron na bang naka-number 4?
Bea, I think let's just read the ones in bold.
The ones in bold.
Yeah. So let's say number 4 is a trans man.
Number 4 is a trans man. Number 5 is a straight female CEO. Number 6 is a bisexual, deaf, cisgender woman. Number 7 is a bisexual, cisgender man who is a police officer. Number 8 is a straight, cisgender grandmother. Number 9 is a genderqueer college student. Number 10 is a trans woman who is a sex worker. Number 11 is a homeless, cisgender gay man. Number 12 is also a cisgender gay man, but he is a travel blogger. Number 13 is a straight cisgender woman who is a farmer. Number 14 is a trans woman who is a teacher. And number 15 is an asexual cisgender female freelance artist.
Okay, so let's go back to Miro. And then I think, Bea, you're going to ask some questions.
Okay, so what we're going to do for this activity is we will I will mention some situations, and the question for all of you is simply whether that statement applies to you or not. So if it's yes, you can move your marker forward. And if it's no, just stay where you are. So for each item, you might answer yes or you might answer no. Okay. Okay, can we start?
Yes.
Okay. So our first item, so yes or no lang. Our first item is, I can find the time to read the newspaper each day. So if your
Yeah, so
answer to
tama
that,
si Sue. Just move one line forward.
yeah. So we're seeing some people are moving forward, some people are staying on the starting line. Okay. Okay. So I think we can take a look at the next slide or the next item. I can get a loan when I need extra money. So if you're in a situation where you need extra money, you can get a loan. Okay, so some people have moved a little further forward, some have stayed behind. Sige, next item, I can negotiate safe sex with my partner. Okay, so we're seeing some people have moved quite a bit. Some people are still where they started. Next question, I can read and write. Okay. Sige, so most people moved forward there. Sige, next. I can refuse a proposition of sex for money or other resources.
So Bea, if they answer no, they move a step back, no?
Do they move a step back? Just
What's
stay
the
where they
instruction?
are. They'll
They
just,
stay. Okay.
okay. So medyo mas kumalat na yung mga places. Sige, the next one. I don't have to worry about where my next meal will come from. Okay. So quite a few people moved forward. So what about, I can leave my partner if he or she threatens my safety? Okay, so some people are getting pretty close to the end of the walk. Sige, next. If I have a health problem, I can get the help I need right away. Okay. Sige. So last two items. The next one is, I have had or will have opportunities to complete my education.
Okay, wait lang. Tingnan daw nila ulit yung stories. Wait lang ah. Ayan. Okay, let's go back to Miro. Last question na ba, Bea?
Yes. So our last question, I can walk down a street at night and not worry about being raped. Okay, so we can see that even though everyone started at the same point dito sa privilege walk natin, as we went through the different items, some people pretty much answered yes to practically every item or most of the items. So parang halos walang obstacles in their way. Whereas we had some people who answered no to almost all of the items. So medyo mas malayo sila. They're almost where they started. And then a lot of people moved a few steps forward but didn't quite make it all the way to the end of the privilege walk. So ano yung ibig sabihin nun? Ano yung kinalaman nun sa intersectional identities natin? So we could see na dun sa iba-ibang situations that we discussed or that I asked you about, that I asked you to respond to, pwedeng iba-ibang forms ng privilege or oppression yung nag-ooperate for us to say yes or no. So someone who is privileged as a CEO might still not be privileged in the sense na kung babae siya, she will still be afraid to walk alone at night without fear of being assaulted. So yung, like Laura said, even if we all start at the same point, others will always be at an advantage and a disadvantage. And yung important insight is that yung specific combination of answers natin, what items we say yes to, what items we say no to, what things we are held back by, will not be defined by any single part of our identity, but rather a combination of the different aspects of our identity. Okay.
Okay, so this hopefully teaches everyone how to empathize with people from different places in life. And so let's start with our panel. Lambea, can you introduce our panel?
So today we're very lucky to have with us our 4 guests who will share with us their insights and experiences of intersectionality, starting with Disney Aguila. So Disney is the president of the organization Pinoy Deaf Rainbow, which is the pioneering organization advocating for the rights of deaf LGBTQIA Filipinos. She's also a board member of the Bahaghari Center for Soji Research, Education and Advocacy Incorporated, or Bahaghari Center. She's an advocate for the inclusion of deaf LGBTQIA Filipinos in the struggle for LGBT plus rights and health, especially in the area of HIV response. So welcome, Disney.
Hello, everyone.
Okay. So KZ is also here to interpret for Disney this afternoon. Our next panel member is Nicky Castillo of the Metro Manila Pride. So Metro Manila Pride is a volunteer-managed, not-for-profit organization that is dedicated to educating, equipping, and empowering the LGBTQIA plus Filipino and their communities to work towards a future that recognizes and respects the rights of LGBTQIA plus persons to a dignified life without discrimination and prejudice. So as one of its overall co-coordinators, Nicky helps ensure that Metro Manila Pride stays true to this commitment. Their work in the organization includes helping provide technical consultancy for the SOGI-specific anti-discrimination bill, helping mold the organization's various learning spaces, and working on messaging for the annual Pride March, among other things. They also currently serve as the Deputy Director of Rainbow Rights Philippines and sit on the steering committee of the ASEAN SOGI Caucus. Hi, Nicky. Welcome.
Hi everyone, salamat for inviting us.
Our next panelist is Ging Cristobal. Ging is the project coordinator for Asia and the Pacific Islands at Outright Action International, based in the Philippines. Ging joined Outright in 2008, bringing with her over 20 years of lesbian feminist activism. Ging has been a technical advisor of UNDP's Being LGBT in Asia regional project. He's one of the co-founders of the ASEAN SOGIE Caucus, which is a coalition of LGBTQI groups in Southeast Asia. She's the former vice chairperson of the board of Amnesty International Philippines and one of the founders of the Lesbian Advocates Philippines, or LEAP Incorporated. She also founded the Stop the Discrimination, or STD Coalition, a multi-sectoral network pushing for the enactment of the Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Bill. She's a Buddhist by philosophy, an 80s music addict, a dog lover, an environmentalist, a videoke junkie, and a proud fashion wreck. So welcome to our panel, Ging.
Hello everyone, magandang hapon.
Gandang hapon, Ging. And finally, we have Rene Principe joining us. Rene is a recent graduate of BS Applied Physics, cum laude, in UP Diliman, and a passionate advocate for queer visibility in the STEM field. Hashtag queer in science. He's currently an MS Physics student and works as an instructor at the National Institute of Physics, UP Diliman. He's affiliated with Anakbayan College of Science, an organization which aims to arouse, organize, and mobilize student scientists in different societal and sectoral issues and become scientists of the people that fight for genuine social change. So hi, Rene.
Hello po.
Hello. Ayan. So our first question for this panel is, do you consider yourself a feminist? And how would you describe your identity in terms of SOGI? And what are your pronouns? Can we start with Disney?
For me, I think, yes, I am a feminist. I'm also a trans woman. And I also support feminism and women's rights. And I stand for women's rights. And I'm also against any types of discrimination. About my pronouns are she and hers.
Thank you, Disney. What about Nikki?
Hi, so I identify as queer. My pronouns are they and them, and yes, I am a feminist.
Thank you. Ging?
I'm a lesbian feminist human rights activist. My pronouns are she and her for now.
Pwede pong magbago, di ba?
Yay,
Salamat.
go fluidity.
Rene?
Hello. Okay. So I'm Rene. I'm a queer scientist, and being an activist, it's part of my advocacy is to forward the causes of feminist movements. My Soji, I'm queer in all aspects. I don't subscribe to those labels. I'm gender fluid, and my pronouns you can refer to me as he, him, his, and they, them, them. You know.
Thank you, Rene. And I wanted to ask, what are you guys currently working on in relation to SOGI? And how do you experience intersectionality in your life and in your work? Disney?
Hello. So I'm working right now for an advocacy with Filipino deaf LGBT. So our organization advocates for the rights of persons with disabilities, specifically with deaf people. We do this through workshop and education for the deaf people who are confused about the SOGI. And we also want to clarify those confusions And I'm also involved in Bahaghari research with hearing people. So our purpose is to research about SOGI and HIV training for specifically for deaf community. Next, I also work at Love Yourself Incorporated. So this is the sign for Love Yourself. So we are all volunteers and we assist also deaf people who came to us for HIV testing. So marami po kasi mga deaf na hindi alam even the definition of HIV, and sometimes wala rin po kaming access to those kind of medical services, and yun din po sa news, we sometimes do not have access. So we provide opportunities and access and through raising awareness about HIV. So I volunteer po doon sa tatlong na-mention ko na communities. Marami pong deaf na members din ng LGBT, maraming misunderstanding about SOGI and HIV. Those two concepts minsan nag-intertwine. So, ayun po, my experience is a little bit hard, but I'm pushing through. Ang isip ko na lang, this is a service para sa mga kapwa ko deaf. And then, about my intersectionality sa akin, so, in my life, nag-overlap din yung tatlong aspect. So, number one, my disability. So, my disability is I'm deaf. And my gender identity is I'm a trans woman. And sign language. So, I think yung access din namin sa sign language, it also involves dun sa intersectionality na experience ko. So, itong tatlong aspect na to, ayun. Okay, for me, I feel satisfied or okay, proud with myself. But when other people look at me at nagiging na-emphasize na itong tatlong factors na to, doon ko na mas na-feel yung oppression. So for example, I'm able but walang access for me. So to give you a comparison, for example, a deaf who is not a member of the LGBT, pero paras na PWD. So ito na-observe ko sa mga nagpupunta sa amin sa Love Yourself. So merong iba na itong isang PWD na ito, yung problems niya ay different from the another PWD na pumupunta rin sa amin. So magkaiba yung kanilang situations in life, pero yun. So yung iba walang access, so yung iba parang 3 times or 3 times yung na-experience nilang oppression. So yung iba naman parang pupunta sa amin, hindi rin nila naintindihan kung ano yung language din mismo, yun yung isa rin sa mga barrier. So that's one of my experience.
Thank you, Disney.
So, another experience po is when I applied to work. So, I won't name the company po. So, nagkaroon po ng evaluation sa akin. So, okay, alam na nila na person with disability ako. Pero, nagkaroon ako ng discrimination, hindi sa disability ko, but sa aking gender. That's all po.
Nicky?
Hi, sorry, I missed what were the questions again?
What are you currently working on in relation to SOGI, and how do you experience intersectionality in your life and work?
What are we working on? So with respect to Metro Manila Pride, we just finished the Pride March and Festival in June, and we had to adjust everything to everything virtual because of what's happening around us. But currently, we're working on a series of talks and workshops as well, parang mga educational discussions katulad nito, which will be both public and private para sa mga volunteers namin. We also work medyo marami. Parang we work with Lagablab, which is a network pushing for the SOGI specific anti-discrimination bill, to push for that bill in Congress and in the Senate. Tapos, nakikiisa rin kami dun sa mga ibang movements katulad nung Achieve This Bill ng Bahaghari to push for the same bill in the Congress. Tapos, we give talks like this. Tapos, how do I experience intersectionality in my life and in my work? I think I'm quite privileged in that for most of my life, all of my friend groups, and because I'm also a freelancer, I can choose who I surround myself with. So in my personal life, it's mostly queer people like me. So it's not very diverse in that I don't have a lot of cishet friends. So the intersections of my queerness is not it's not something that, you know, para siyang pang araw-araw na siya para sa akin. And there are other things that shield me from other forms of oppression. Kasi I katulad nung limitaw dun sa exercise kanina na I do belong to the middle class. I live in NCR. I'm privileged enough to be, you know, to be able to connect with you on Zoom, on a laptop. You know, when so many people, you see them on Twitter raising money for laptops, etc., diba? So, para sa akin, hindi siya ganun ka-glaring sa akin personally. There are some moments when parang lumilitaw, parang, ano ba, nararamdaman ko that I do have to censor myself. Pero, parang hindi nagiging second nature na siya sa akin. Like, for example, nung panahon na pwede ba tayong mag-cab or mag-grab, tapos nalaman when you get a chatty driver and then they will ask, may boyfriend ka na ba, iha, or something like that, I would always have to think, okay, kasi I am feminine expressing, so hindi naman nila makikita that I am queer, diba? I would also always have to dodge that question, parang, ay, wala pa po, ganyan, or bakit wala pa? And I've never ever revealed na may girlfriend po ako, ganyan, kasi nakakatakot siya. So, yun yung intersection ng queerness ko and yung pagiging feminine presenting ko, which people perceive me to be as a woman, di ba, ganyan. So, doon siya lumilitaw sa personal na buhay ko. In our work, mas nakikita ko siya. Kasi the LGBTQIA+ community, it's not a monolith, no? So, sobrang, kahit na tinatawag siya na isang sektor o isang komunidad, katulad na lang ng nakikita natin dun sa mga kinento ni Disney at sa maririnig natin from our other resource persons, it's so diverse, no? Ito, perspective lang to ng mga nasa middle class and for the most part, mga abled folks, no? With the exception of Disney, who is able to give us the perspective of persons with disability who are also LGBTQIA+. So, mas dun sa trabaho in Metro Manila Pride, in Rainbow Rights, in ASEAN SOGI Caucus, namin nakikita yung tahi-tahi na walang parang one-size-fits-all na solusyon. At dito pumapasok yung kailangan mo talagang mag-work across sectors in solidarity with other sectors kasi hindi ka lang naman LGBT, no? Pwede ka ring manggagawa, pwede ka ring estudyante, pwede ka ring matanda na, ganyan. Pwede ka ring merong anong tawag dito, mga mga undiagnosed disabilities, pwede ka ring may cancer, gano'n. So, sobra dami niyang intersections at mas dun ko nakikita or namin na-encounter yung intersections ng komunidad natin at dun talaga kami natututo kung paano dapat, these spaces should all exist for all of us.
Thank you, Nicky. And what about Ging?
Ako, dahil sa aking youth, Ching, like other marginalized groups in the Philippines, LGBTIQ groups, we advocate for change in laws and policies. So yung inclusion ng SOGI with the SC or sex characteristics for intersex persons, ay gusto nating mapasok sa existing policies, laws, and programs. Pero we all know that laws are not enough. So ang ginagawa talaga ngayon is sad to say, kailangan natin gawin na we have to teach members of society about SOGIE, SC, human rights, intersectionality, and feminism. So when I do workshops, lahat yun dapat kasama palagi. Even if the issue is about a different topic, ang leveling of lagi doon. Kasi kahit may batas na, people will still discriminate, treat others unequally, pero hindi nila alam na ginagawa nila yon. So intentional or not, it's still discrimination. And sasabihin nila, hindi ko naman sinasadya eh. So mas magandang bawasan natin ang ignorance, kasi ignorance kills. At unlike my generation before, mga books are on human rights, LGBTIQ concerns are very rare. Sa booksale lang kami yung nakakakita dahil wala pa nun Amazon, wala pa nun deliveries like now. So to be apathetic is not an excuse right now. So anong ginagawa ko sa work ko? So while we support the SOGIE bill, we are also advocating for the comprehensive anti-discrimination bill. Ito yung anti-discrimination bill that penalizes discrimination based on one's sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, if you are a member of the indigenous community, if you are a person with disability, if you are young, if you're old. So may existing tayong mga batas, pero yung mga cracks or gaps ng mga batas na yun, wala kasing provisions on discrimination. So ito yung nag-a-address sa mga kakulangan ng mga existing laws. And kagaya ng SOGIE bill, ang Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Bill, may preventive mechanism siya na ma-educate ang mga tao na ginawang provision yun na require ang government and private institutions to educate people about intersectionality, about the issues of marginalized groups para mabawasan and sa future, mawalang ang discrimination. So we formed the STD Coalition or Stop the Discrimination Coalition. It's a multi-sectoral loose coalition of different marginalized groups advocating for the enactment of the Comprehensive Anti-Discrimination Bill. Sa project ko naman, ngayon, kinababaliwan ko ay yung gender-based violence na project sa Quezon City. So yung pinakamaliit lang naman na city na may 3 million population with 142 barangays at ng Muntinlupa, where we teach service providers to provide service and intervention and support to LGBTIQ persons who experience domestic violence or tinatawag na intimate partner violence and family violence. Tapos, I still continue doing workshops sa jail, sa police, sa correctional, and right now, yung usapin ng pag-address sa mga operational handbook sila so that ignorance will not spread at mga fake news. In my personal life, I'm living in feminism kasi it's not just a perspective, and intersectionality should not just be a perspective. It should be how you live your life, pati human rights. Na laging yung laging pang question mo, parang siya rotary na, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it foster goodwill and mga ganon? Lagi kang magkakaroon ng analysis na, so fair ba ako? So itong nararamdaman ko, saan nanggagaling to? So may analysis laging ganon. And you don't treat other people as enemies, but potential allies na through discussion, they will have intersectional lens, they will have human rights perspective at feminist principles para may #world peace. I thank you.
Hello. Ayan. Ako naman si Rene. So, I'm a fresh graduate. And medyo bago pa lang sa akin itong advocacy work. And I advocate for #queer in science to promote queer visibility in the STEM field and encourage everyone to consider a career in the science sector. For me kasi important na meron tayong presence sa field na hindi sana yung tao na makita tayo. Kasi growing up, I didn't have anyone like me to look up to. So nag-physics ako kasi gusto kong maging astronaut. Pero nahirapan akong tahakin ang path na yun kasi wala naman ako nakikitang baklang astronaut. Wala akong nakikitang baklang scientist. Nasaan sila? Like, mahirap yun. So I want to be that somebody for someone right now who could see me. And I'm proud of my identities, a loud and proud queer, femme, Cagayanon, Visaya, and an applied physicist. So I'm proud of these identities. So my focus is on the youth sector, especially here in UP Diliman. That's why I'm part of Anakbayan College of Science. Kasi ito parang magiging future leaders to sila. So it's future leaders, future lawmakers, future educators, engineers, scientists. It's important to have parang mag-contribute ka sa ideological evolution. And for me then, having a safe space in UP contributed to the overall well-roundedness. And I believe it enabled me to be at my best state to achieve my feats in academics. So gusto kong ipakita sa everyone na if you give a child a safe space, parang wala makakapigil sa'yo. And I actually grew up in extreme poverty. I recently trended online because of my story. So I grew up in extreme poverty. And growing up, wala kaming masyadong opportunity to confront the nuances in our identity. Kasi if wala kang makain, parang magiging secondary yung problem mo sa gender mo. Ika nga nila, you lose your spirit over a hungry stomach. So I hope when we celebrate Pride Month and we don't forget those marginalized LGBT sa kanayunan na hindi makaselebrate ng Pride, hindi ma-celebrate yung kanilang identity. And in my experiences rin as a petty bourgeois, mga college students, common sa amin na may unconscious thought kami na need namin maka-achieve ng something bago kami magkaroon ng courage to come out our families. Which is not, kasi our identity should be our own and we should be unapologetic about it. So point is, I want to focus na there are economic barriers which hinders our freedom to gender expression. And I want to push my story forward because it is different. And that's danger sa ating LGBT community na magkaroon ng single story. Kaya tayo stereotype, etc. So, ayun. I focus on the youth sector and queer in science.
Thank you, Rene. And I added the link dun sa chat if anyone wants to read about what Rene posted before. Bea?
So thank you everyone for your answers. For our next question, since all of you mentioned that you do see yourselves as feminists, yung next question natin is, what do you think feminists can do to be more inclusive of persons of diverse SOGI, including LGBTQIA++ people? I know it's a challenging question, but if it's okay, we'd like to ask you to keep your answers brief para hopefully may time din yung audience to ask questions later. Okay. So what do you think feminists can do to be more LGBT+ inclusive? Nicky, okay lang ba if we start with you?
No, pwedeng later. My dogs are... Wait lang.
Okay. Sige. Maybe we can go back to Disney for this question first.
Sige, siguro kung sino na lang yung ready magsagot.
Disney is signing po. She said, I'm thinking of the answer, but I'll try my best to answer the question. For me, feminist, it's a challenge for feminists kasi when we go back before, specifically for trans women, so yung trans women are not included in the category of women. So maraming tumitingin sa trans women at natatakot sa mga trans women. So yun, may specific na problem involving trans women that I've observed. But okay, so there's a transphobia for trans people. So I think this is the sign for transphobic. Yes. So yes, it's still a challenge for feminists to involve and support yung human rights of trans people and to understand, to give opportunity I think ito importante sa education. Hindi yung parang cancel culture na kapag nagkamali sila, magka-away tayo. So, but to give opportunity for them to be able din na mabago yung perspective nila, to have an open mind, an open heart, and ayun, magkadugtong yung ating heart and mind na mabuksan if we explain it to other people. And I think feminists also must stand for different types of people. I think so yung different situation nga na mention natin kanina, dapat ma-involve yun. That's all po.
Thank you so much, Disney. Ging, I think, wanted to say something earlier. Okay lang ba, Ging?
Okay. Para leveling of yun sa ibang tao, yung feminism kasi, siya ay isang perspective at guide on how you analyze and live your life. Para bang nakikita mo yung inequities at nakikita mo na yung patriarchy o yung mindset na ang lalaki, ang standard lalaki, ang mas malakas lalaki, ang #king of the world, hindi totoo yun, di ba? Tignan mo kung paano yun gumagalaw sa lipunan na ginagalawan mo. Paano ka magsalita, paano ka tignan ng lahat, how you engage, how you make decisions, how you treat people. Kasi whether we like it or not, it's so embedded in our psyche, in our culture, in our tradition. So that's why we really have to be conscious na mawala yun. Ngayon, may mga kinoconsider ng mga feminist na essentialist na gusto lang talaga nila yung biological female, ang sinasabing babae. Ngayon, once na ginawa mo yun, yung sinasabing TERF, yung trans-exclusive radical feminist, ang dami kasing mga subcategories ng feminism. Para sa akin, ito ay discrimination. Ito ay exclusion. Kung ang isang naniniwala ka na pantay lahat, so lahat ng tao may karapatang mag-identify kung sino siya. Ngayon, pag nagsimula ka maglagay ng checklist sa ibang tao at sasabihin mo, hindi sila babae kasi wala kang ganyan, kasi wala kang ganito, kasi may ganyan ka, tayo rin, magaganyanan tayong lahat. So, hindi lang sa pagiging babae. Sinong pangit? Sinong maganda? Sinong matalino? Sinong bobo? Sinong mayaman? Sinong mahirap? So, lahat tayo, magkakanya-kanyang checklist hanggang dumating ang point na lahat tayo magiging indifferent sa isa't isa, na hindi natin sinarelate yung diversity natin. We're not all the same. We are all different. We have to celebrate that. Yun yung diversity. But we are all equal. So kung ang tao ay magsabi siyang babae siya, tanggapin mong babae siya. Hindi mo siya tatanungin na, bakit ganito? So ngayon, sa akin, kung ikaw ay feminista at sinabi mo hindi trans, ang mga trans women ay hindi babae, hindi ka feminista for me. Yun lang sa akin. Ngayon, we have to acknowledge every day we discriminate. Kaya feminista ka, kaya human rights ka, you just have to check yourself all the time. Diba? Kasi, hindi, mahirap naman yung utopic world na lahat perfect. Yun nga yung kinaganda ng journey natin, na yung we learn from our imperfections, yung pagkakamali natin. And then one day, kung gano'n ang mindset ng lahat, di ba, para bang mas less war, less gulo, less corruption, less greed, kasi you'll be kinder. Kasi hindi mo nakikita na mas magaling ka sa iba, mas maayos ka, mas. Pero inisip mo, lahat tayo may kanya-kanyang aking talino at ganda. Next.
Thank you so much, Ging, dun sa pang beauty pageant na sagot mo. Nicky, can we ask you, I hope your dogs have settled down.
Ang harot nila. Karakit lang nila. Sige. Ang ganda nung sinabi both ni Disney at saka ni Ging, actually. Tapos I think Ging provided a really good foundation to the discussion or this question as well. Siguro para sa akin, kasi yung feminismo hindi lang naman din siya para sa mga tao who identify as women, right? I think feminism as a movement does try to dismantle unjust systems that are put up by patriarchy. Tapos these same oppressive systems that are created by patriarchy and upheld by patriarchy are the same ones that oppress LGBTQIA+ people. So in the end, halos pareho lang din yung nilalabanan or dinidismantle nating system. So we have a common goal. And para sa akin, it is not feminism if it isn't intersectional. Lalo na since iisa lang din naman yung nilalabanan natin at dinidismantle natin. So I think yun yung pinakasimpleng dapat tandaan ng mga folks who are feminists but still strive to exclude people who are oppressed by patriarchy as well. Na parang balik tayo dun sa pinakasentro ng ating kilusan at paniniwala, 'di ba? Parang kung sino-sino, kung yung mga tao or yung mga grupo ng mga tao na parang dinadahas or ino-oppress din ng patriarchy, sila rin yung dapat kasama natin at pinaglalaban natin. So, ganun at ganun lang din, I think, kasimple siya na nakakalimutan na lang din, I think, maybe because the information isn't, I don't know, the information that people get siguro ay natitwist ng ibang tao for it to, especially TERFs or farts, they twist it to uphold their reading of what feminism is. But I think, ayun na nga, so bottom line, if it's not intersectional, it's not feminism, it's something else. It's a bastardization of what it is.
So I think this Ging and Nicky have all emphasized na there are ways for us as feminists, whether you're LGBT or cisgender heterosexual, there are ways for us to be more SOGI, more inclusive of LGBT plus people, including educating ourselves and being open to learning and reminding ourselves na merong pinag-uugatan na yung na systems, na structures, yung iba-ibang oppressions na na-experience ng women, whether you are cisgender, heterosexual, or LGBT. Yung next question natin has to do with, it's actually very similar or related to a previous question. So in your life, how does the intersection of your SOGI and your other aspects affect the way people treat you? And we've already mentioned some ways in which you experience intersectionality. But there are some things, for example, na hindi pa natin masyadong na-touch on. Like, for example, yung religion, nag-i-intersect din ba siya with your experiences of intersectionality? Or maybe other things as well, like your physical features. Dahil na-mention ni Ging kanina yung question ng attractiveness. Yeah, sige. So maybe we can ask Rene to give a brief answer.
Okay, ayun. Part of me believes na I'm only tolerated right now. Tolerated ako ng family ko and ng community because in their eyes, I was able to achieve something. So, okay lang naman na bakla ako as long as blank. So, there's always a catch. And that implies tolerance. So, in LGBTQ+, we are the way we are tolerated is intertwined with the social, political, and economic structures. So, magbigay lang ako ng examples dun sa tatlo. Sa social structures, na-mention kanina yung patriarchy. Alam niyo ba na within the gay community, merong internalized homophobia kung saan mas nadi-discriminate yung mga effeminate kaysa masculine gays. Kasi rooted pa rin siya sa pagtingin na isang weakness ang femininity sa isang patriarchal na society. Tapos, yung sexual harassments then of men is underreported kasi nga in a patriarchal society, men can't be victims kasi they're supposed to be superior. Sa political naman, meron tayong religious barriers which hinders legislation of laws. Ang funny nga nito yung country na nagbigay sa atin ng Christianity, which is Spain. Nauna pang nagkaroon ng same-sex marriage at more inclusive laws. Nakapagpadala din sila ng first trans woman sa Miss Universe pageants. Tapos last touch up ko dun sa economic aspect. hindi pa rin comparable yung experiences ng isang mayaman at mahirap na LGBTQ+. Kahit pantay sila na, pwede silang ma-discriminate pero hindi pa rin pantay ang kanilang struggles. Kunyari yung isang trans woman na yun nga, naghahanap ng job, hindi niya afford na mag-turn down ng jobs or mag-defy ng barbaric dress codes kasi desperado siyang kumita. Unlike a privileged one na mas may access sa safe spaces or mas afford na mag-create ng safe spaces na detached sa expectations ng current economic climate. So overall, being apolitical is in itself a privilege that everyone cannot afford. So yun lang. Merong factors in social, political, and economic aspects.
Okay, so thank you, Rene, for elaborating on how many other aspects of your identity, social class, yung expression mo, gender expression mo as a member of the LGBT community have also contributed to the kind of oppressions that you have experienced. Siguro we can ask our panelists one last question. Yung last question natin talks about yung pagiging intersectional ng struggles natin. So how do you think that a win in a different issue can make our own movements stronger? So for example, kung merong pinaglalaban yung women's movement, how can it contribute to other movements as well, like LGBT advocacy or LGBT rights?
Magtatawag ba kayo?
Ging, do you want to start?
Sige. Sa akin kasi, ang challenge kasi, kung meron kang intersectional lens, ang struggles ng ibang marginalized groups, para bang may main membership ka. Gaya ko, may main membership ako sa women's group, sa women's movement. Ang second ko, or siguro magkaka-level, maliliit lang, mga centigrades lang ang difference sa LGBTIQ, sa intersectional movements, sa lahat. Na kailangan nakasawsaw ang kamay mo sa lahat. Yun nga sinasabi na bakit pag may LGBTIQ issues, hindi nakikialam ang mga ibang human rights groups. Ang tanong, tayo ba nakikialam sa iba't ibang social political issues? Pag merong magsasaka, gumagawa rin ba tayo ng statement to support them kung sila ay nakakaranas ng lahas or injustice? So dapat lahat ng issue ay issue ng isang LGBTIQ person. Para makita din ng mga tao ng issue namin, kasi lagi ko sinasabi, ang issue ng isang LGBTIQ person ay issue ng lahat. Dahil kung ang nanay mo ay mukhang tomboy gaya ko, at nawalan ng trabaho, kasi dahil lang sa itsura niya at pinagkama na siyang tomboy, ang issue ng LGBTIQ ay issue ng lahat. Kung ang kapatid mong lalaki na may girlfriend, nirape at binubugat pinatay, kasi pinagkama lang bakla. As long as masama ang tingin ng mga tao sa LGBTIQ person, lahat damay-damay. As long as mga tao ang tingin sa mga persons with disability ay pabigat, lahat tayo damay-damay. Kasi hindi mo naman masabing hindi ka PWD in the future. So doon ko pa lang ba makikijoin sa issues ng PWDs o persons with disability kung ikaw ay miyembro na nila? Hindi ka naman bata para sa child's rights, pero makikialam tayo. So lahat, para maramdaman mo na win, nakisawsaw ka kasi tao ka. Yun lang yun. Kung tingin mo tao ka, lahat ng human issues, human rights issues, makisawsaw ka. So para win ang feeling. Kung feeling ko, ang vibe ko ngayon na beauty queen.
Thank you so much, Ging. Sige, Disney.
I think, just to give an example, in our community sa amin sa DEF, merong similar struggle na na-mention si Ging kanina. Meron kaming divided attention for FSL advocacy and sa advocacy ng SOGIE Equality Bill. So yung mga deaf, mas focus sila mag-support doon sa FSL law dahil pero okay, mas focus ang mga deaf support sa FSL law, pero pagdating sa SOGIE Equality Bill, wala silang pake or hindi sila nagbibigay attention. Pero dahil both yun ay nararanasan ko, yung access sa sign language and also yung sa SOGIE Equality Bill, isa yun sa na-observe ko sa mga kapwa ko deaf na divided yung attention namin or ng community namin dahil hindi sila interested. Ay, ako hindi ako member ng LGBT, pero deaf ako. So, support ako sa FSL Act. Pero sa SOGIE, parang hindi ko yan thing. So, pero hindi nila naiintindihan na both issues are, naka-under siya sa issue ng access. So, ayun po. Just to give an example po.
Thank you so much, Disney. Nicky, what are your thoughts on this question?
I was trying to look for, there's this video that we shared last June of, but I can't find it anyway. I'll just drop in the link later, of one of the the kids from the Bakwit school. So the Lumad kids who come to Metro Manila to do their schooling here kasi it's heavily militarized in their areas. At pinapatay talaga sila doon sa mga lupain na kanila naman talaga, no? And merong isang sobrang gandang sinabi yung nagsalita para dun sa mga Bakwit kids na parang something about yung diskriminasyon at yung oppression na binabakan ng mga LGBT ay parang kabit-kabit lang din siya. At yun din yung diskriminasyon at oppression na binabakan ng mga lumad, ng mga magsasaka at ng mga iba pang mga marginalized at vulnerable groups. Katulad ng sinabi ni Ging, no, kabit-kabit naman talaga yung mga struggles natin. And ultimately, if a movement or a social cause truly is serving the people, kung yung objective talaga niya is to serve the people, hindi yung mga, kung merong fake news, meron din, I think, mga fake social movements right now who are doing things in bad faith, no? Pero kung yung social cause na yon or yung movement or yung coalition na yon ay talagang ang objective niya ay to serve the people, and whenever they do get a victory, I think it's something that we should all celebrate and reach across sectors and stand in solidarity with these wins. Unang-una because they are few and far between. Katulad na lang din ng experience ng RH law, di ba? Ilang taon yung sa inyo? 12 years yung batas na yon at batas pa lang yun. Hindi katulad ng sinabi rin ni Ging kanina, that's just policy change. There's still cultural changes that we have to keep on doing kahit na may ganyang klaseng batas. So whenever we do get these wins, it's important that we celebrate them because it does affect all of us. Ultimately, dahil yung mga tao within our community, they also belong to these other communities na naapektuhan ng lahat ng mga successes na to at victories na to at pati yung mga blows to these movements. Kaya dapat, I think, andun tayo, hindi naman kailangan 100% na nakafocus ka sa lahat ng mga I think social movements kasi tao lang din naman tayo, hindi natin yun kaya, wala tayong ganong kakayahan na 100% ka sa lahat, no? Meron ka talagang focus, pero hindi ibig sabihin na may focus ka, na in my case, it's LGBTQI+ rights, no? Hindi dahil may focus ako na ganon, ay ibig sabihin kakalimutan ko na yung mga kasama sa mga ibang mga sektor who are also fighting to dismantle these structures that are all bringing us down, that are all oppressing us, and are all responsible for us having to even fight or struggle in the first place. So when the wins come, celebrate them. And when the blows come, reach out in solidarity and find out how you can help as well with statements or with standing with them in pickets or kung hanggang kahit pag-share lang ng mga donation drives, I think that counts, or sending messages of solidarity. I think is super, super important.
Thank you. And last, let's ask Rene.
Ayun, experiences ko dito sa UP, magulo ang politika. So, mayroong differences in ideologies. So, minsan ko na rin natanong, bakit bakit hindi sinasama yung ibang struggles sa gender struggles ng isang movement? Ganun. Ang reply nila nun ay, baka daw kasi ma-dilute yung pinaglalaban. Pero I refuse to believe that kasi naniniwala kong systemic yung oppression. So when we combat it, we have to move systematically and collectively. So I'm part of an NDMO, National Mass Democratic Organization. So multi-sectoral ito na paglaban. And I think we can take inspiration from how intersectionality actually originated. So it's from the immigrant women of color no 1980s. So nagkaroon ng conversation kasi hindi masolve ng feminist movement alone and ng anti-racist movement alone yung struggle ng women of color. So they have to create a new avenue or new organization for them. But still it is grounded on those existing struggles. So it is recent history, so we still have a very long way to go. And what we can do is to actually listen to the unique experiences and never assume something. Iba pa rin kasi yung teorya at praktika kasi I learned all these multitude of terms in my social science classes. Pero fully ko lang siya na-understand nung nagkaroon ako ng basic mass integration. So, example nung pumunta ako sa LUMADS, na-witness ko yung threefold self-struggle nila, being a cultural minority, being an LGBT, and being a Moro. So doon lang ako fully naka-empathize talaga na it's a lot bigger than what we think. So we should also never lose our sense of urgency because we've come a long way na, and there's still a very long way to go. Advocacy groups should work systematically together to combat the problems with systematic root causes. You know?
Thank you, Rene. And actually sa FF, no, like because we deal with a lot of different kinds of human rights, sometimes napapagod kami, especially lately with all of the human rights violations, kung saan ka mag-exert ng effort dahil, yun nga, I mean, tao lang din tayo, napapagod din. So, yun, sana magtulungan tayo. Please open for question and answer, Bea.
Okay. So we're very, very thankful to our panel members for spending their time with us this afternoon, for sharing their insights and experiences and the work that they do, as well as calling us all to collaborate, diba? In these movements that we are all part of. At this point, if there are questions from our audience, questions, comments, especially for our panelists, kung meron kayong gustong itanong, please type it into the chat. Okay, so we have a question from Mang Tomas. Sabi niya, I am a guy who is currently a college student. I consider myself to be part of LGBT. There was this spectrum of sexual orientation. I'm not sure of my position in it. Sabi niya, is there a way to confirm that my sexual orientation is semi-bisexual, more of homosexual, considering that I am not yet interested in dating? And how likely is it to change over time? And then is it true that they say that semi-bisexual is just a confused stage? Or could it be that actually is my gender which would last? Okay, so this is a great question about Soji, about personal identity. And siguro this is the kind of question na wala naman talagang simpleng sagot. Because kagaya nga ng na-mention natin kanina, and even Ging shared frankly na yung reality, yung lived experiences natin ng sexual orientation, ng gender identity, pwedeng magkaroon ng pagbabago over time. Not because nagkamali ka dun sa dati mong pagkakakilala sa sarili mo, pero pwedeng nagbago talaga yung some aspects of who you are. So I think rather than telling someone na sa tingin ko yung identity mo talaga is ganito, Instead, I would like to encourage all of us to try to let go, maybe, or loosen up on yung common na notion natin, I think, na dapat lahat tayo merong ma-determine natin yung ano ba talaga yung category ko, ano ba talaga yung box that I fit into. Because, di ba, yung boxes na to, yung categories na to, at the end of the day, they are socially constructed, di ba? That means that as society knows more and more and understands more and more, nagbabago rin yung categories that are available to us. So I think that instead of trying to figure out ano ba yung essence ng sexual orientation ko para ma-label ko na siya, I think the important thing is to find out ano yung mga relationships, partnerships, interactions that I am interested in pursuing now, that give me a sense of fulfillment and belongingness at the moment. To be comfortable with the idea that maybe that is not clearly defined by a label, and that's okay. So I hope that answer makes sense. Kahit na hindi ko sinagot by defining a particular category.
Bea, can I add?
Oh, sure.
Yun. Actually, ako, lesbian ako ngayon. I'm not sure after 5 years or 10 years, ako ay lesbian pa rin. Pwede ako maging heterosexual, pwede ako maging asexual. So lahat tayo pwedeng magbago, kaya yung sinasabi ng isang ating audience participant natin na si AR, gender is fluid. Ngayon, ang tanong kasi dyan, bakit tayo matatakot mag-iba-iba? Kasi ang nakakatakot sa panahon ngayon, kasi alam natin yung makarapatan natin, hindi nga siya privilege, yung mga human rights natin ay pwedeng mawala. Pwedeng hindi na ako mahalin ng family ko, pwedeng mawala ng trabaho, pwede ako mabugbog, pwede ako mapatay. Kung ako ay lalahit cisgender male, maging feminine na gay or queer or ano pa man. Kasi nga, ang kailangan nating alisin ay yung mga stereotypes at saka yung gender binary role nga na pag lalaki ka, masculine ka, pag babae ka, feminine ka. So yun din ang challenge ko sa inyo. Anong kinakatakutan nyo? Kung ngayon bukas ay magkapalit-palit tayo ng mga sexual orientation or gender identity. Nakakatakot yung iba. Kasi isipin nyo bakit. At yung may isip nyo, yun ang kailangang labanan natin, bubuwagin natin. Dumating yung time na kay semi-bisexual ka, kay pansexual ka, hindi ka matatakot. Kasi alam mo, intact pa rin lahat ng human rights mo. And I thank you.
Actually, nakaka-relate ako dyan, no? Kasi before, when I didn't have enough information yet, I thought I was straight. And then now, I actually identify as a queer asexual. So parang the more you learn, like, you can really, it's a spectrum kasi, di ba? So you can see where you are. And it can change over time nga. Salamat.
Yeah, sorry, dagdagan ko lang din. Similar to Christine, nagbago na rin yung labels ko for myself since I started becoming more self-aware. So, nung high school ako, ayoko ng labels. And it was not just ayoko ng labels, but it was like, there was internalized homophobia there. Na parang, hindi ako tomboy, hindi ako lesbiana. Basta gusto ko lang ng mga babae. Because parang, yun, may ganong takot. And I was in high school, so parang wala pa ako masyadong alam. And throughout the years, the labels that I used changed from lesbian to pansexual and then now queer. And it's still changing until now. Meron pa rin akong mga things at the back of my head that I'm still trying to process myself. Tapos para sa akin, and at least in my experience, labels are more for yourself than it is for other people. Kasi ito yung isa sa mga paraan, lalo na kung bago pa lang siya sa'yo, nakakatakot kasi yung parang sobra siyang undefined dahil nga unknown siya sobra sa'yo. So it's easier for you to define it para nagiging mas known quantity siya for you, diba? Kasi parang at least hindi siya isang parang amorphous mass of something. So kapag nabibigyan mo yung sarili mo, okay, ito ako, it doesn't necessarily mean na kung ano yung tama na label for you now is gonna be wrong for you in the future, or gonna be right for you in the future. I think nakadepende siya sa kung gaano kung paano lumalalim yung pagkakakilanlan mo sa sarili mo. Sa mga, katulad ng sinabi ni Bea, sa mga relationships mo with other people, sa mga attractions mo with other people. So, hindi tayo dapat matakot na magbago-bago siya. Kasi wala namang tama or mali sa pagbabago-bago niya or sa hindi niya pagbago. So, I think go lang. If yun, it's not a confused stage. You're just getting to know yourself. And it's okay for you to get to know yourself as you age. So, okay lang yan.
Okay. Thank you again. Yes. Yeah.
A quick reminder lang din to those of us who are more vanilla, like me, na hindi naman nagbago yung identity, parang forever ng cishet. On our part, let's also be supportive of our friends and family. Kung meron silang nagbabagong fluid na identities, let's make them feel safe in exploring those things para ma-lessen din kasi yung pressure na ano ka ba talaga? Kasi hindi lang manggagaling sa sarili mo yon, yung comfort level na yon, pero manggagaling din sa mga nakapaligid sa'yo. So, I hope that we can all also create that safe space so that everyone feels comfortable exploring yung shifts sa gender identity, sexual orientation. Okay.
Sige, thank you everyone again for joining us for Feminist Fridays. And next week, we have Fostering Safe Spaces for our workshop. And Bea will also talk about that. So not today, we talked about the intersectionalities. And then next week, we're going to talk about how do we make it more accessible for people. So join us again next week. And then please also let us know what you learned or what you thought of this workshop. The link is at bit.ly/feministfridays-eval. So please click that link and send us your thoughts. And thank you. So I'll stop the live stream now. So bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.